today's meeting is to first of all understand how we build an information security framework. And the most important thing we would like to understand is when we talk of an information security framework, what exactly do we mean? That is the most important thing that we need to understand as we move on with the details of how we create one. And when we are talking of an information security framework, talk about being the total or the totality of the policies, standards, and guidelines, as well as procedures that pertain to information security. When we were studying, we said that there are three basic um, pillars which are going to guide on how information security is going to be implemented within an organization. And one of them, a policy, is going to be made up of a standard and a guideline and then a procedure. So those are the three main pillars are going to form a policy, because policy is going to be like the rules or guidelines are going to be followed. And for them to be made, they need to have the right standards, the right guidelines, and the right procedures. And that is what creates a framework or a complete set of standards, guidelines, and procedures which are going to enable us implement information security in an organization. And so this framework is going to be made up of a set of practices, policies, and procedures which are going to enable us now put up a security. So these policies and procedures are going to have a detailed set of security strategies so that you can have a calculated approach in handling the risk and reduce the risk through controls. And then it has to be a measurable and for methodology. How do we talk about being a measurable and for methodology? Because it needs to be measured or need to be able to evaluate and tell whether the strategy you are following is working, and if it is working, can it be repeated elsewhere, or after some time, can it be enhanced, can it be improved? That is what I mean by making it repeat, meaning that you can enhance it, meaning that you can do it over and over, and it will still give you the positive result that you are looking for. So that is why we say this security framework has to be measurable, has to be stable. Then we also look at purpose. What we need the policy framework, or why do we need in general? One is for education purposes. It's very important that people are educated regarding information security. Remember, we said information security is going to look at both the hardware and the software. We'll also look at the information that is stored within the organization and also being transmitted over networks, whether within the organization or between the organization and other stakeholders. So all of these need to be educated, or you need to provide education regarding information that is stored, information that is being transmitted. We also need to provide information regarding the hardware and software within the organization. Then we also need to facilitate secure implementation and maintenance of knowledge. Like we said in our previous class, is that knowledge is dynamic. So technology that you are dealing with today is going to be different with what is there tomorrow. And so you need a way of maintaining or a way of making sure that whatever you are securing is up to date, or security framework that you are using is relevant and is working effectively, meaning that it is up to date and is working. Then you need to ensure processes are secured and auditable. So here the most important thing is, are you able to audit? Are you able to count the check? Are you able to evaluate and see that the security strategy that you have in place is what? Then you can create common language. This is very important because within an organization, all the stakeholders need to have the same language in regard to security frameworks, meaning that they need to be able to speak in one voice. They need to be able to understand security policy in one perspective. If you have said that all gadgets need to have a username and password, then that is the language which is cascaded down the organization. If you have said that when you bring your own device, it needs to be uploaded all the app, then that is the language that goes over the organization. So that some may be, you avoid a scenario whereby some people have their gadgets, others have not. That is not going to be an effective method. Then you also need to provide a reference for designing a security, meaning that you are going to have something check again. Like when you talk of this is how the policy should work, this is the reason, this is the justification as to why it's working that way. That is why we are talking of a reference. Right? There is something you can check against. You're not just coming up with a security mechanism just out of the blue, but is informed by some research, is informed by some knowledge by which you build that understanding. And then you ensure measurement and benchmarking. So here is the point whereby you can be able to compare. First of all, you are able to measure, you are able to evaluate, see that security mechanism you have in place is working, and then you can provide for benchmarking. Check with others within your industry, check with others within computing world, and see if you are also in line. So why do we need to have that security framework? First of all, it is a regulatory requirement, meaning that it's required by regulating bodies. Like you will have a security in your systems. Like if you are dealing with cards, then there are those requirements you need to adhere to: public safety, physical assets, assets and information, and also to create differentiation, meaning that you have to be different from your competitors, you have to be different from other players. So this policy framework, how is it going to help us? It's going to provide the foundation for a security program. It also requires compliance from all the employees. So it's like a checking for technique, because it will require everybody to adhere to that. So it becomes like a checking. Then it is approved at a higher level, meaning that it has what we call management support. Then it should stand the test of time. So when we talk about the test of time, meaning that it needs to have been checked, it needs to be able to support all the challenges in a, like we have said, technology is going to be dynamic, and so you need to be able to provide that kind of support. Then it needs to provide details of security controls, meaning that you can be able to look at details that is in terms of policy. So here, think of policy. So when you are looking at a policy, then it needs to provide details of security controls. It needs to derive their authority from the policies. Then it requires compliance from all the employees. So that is very important, meaning that a policy has to be adhered. Then when we come to standards, then standards refer to the step-by-step instructions which are going to help in performing a security task. And they may require compliance depending on the organization and prevailing circumstances. So there are some organizations which do not require, there are some organizations which may not require compliance, others may require compliance, like you have given the example of security, the credit cards, meaning that they need to have adherence to some standards. So whatever we are doing, there has to be that adherence. But when we look at other organizations, maybe like education institutions, there may be some leeway on how you are going to look at them. So when we are talking about procedures also, a procedure is going to provide a security advice, or it is going to guide a user in the process of maybe implementing that security feature they are looking for. It's going also to help in aligning with industry good practices. That, like when you say all apps have to be, all devices need to have maybe two-step authentication, then that is helping you to adhere to good standard practices, and they are also optional. They are not mandatory. So standards and procedures, some may be optional, others may be mandatory. But a policy is going to be mandatory so that you can always be able to adhere to guidelines and procedures within the industry. So how do you create framework? A framework is created following the compliance requirements in the area of focus. So if you are talking about in the banking industry, there are those compliance requirements. If we are talking about in the higher education industry, there are also going to be compliance requirements, maybe in terms of checking for plagiarism, in terms of ensuring confidentiality if you are talking about exams and in exams, integrity and all of that. So each of the frameworks um, is going to be following some compliance requirements in a specific area of focus, and the certification objectives are going to be following those requirements. So when we are looking at the information security frameworks, then they are going to be coming from different sources. We have the PCI DSS, we have the ISO, we also have the CIS, the NIST standards, and any other. So they can come from different bodies which have come up with frameworks that are guiding information security employees in coming up with different kinds of frameworks. So that is going to vary depending on how you want to implement your security framework and what is your organizational objective. That is very important. So an hybrid framework is going to be an acceptable solution in that it's going to address the area of focus. Maybe you're going to combine the ISO standards together with NIST standards. Then you come up with an hybrid framework depending on your area of focus. Maybe you're looking at controlling identity protection and then detecting response or covering people, processes, and technology, all of that. You're also looking at hybrid framework for evacuation procedure if there is a disaster, incident reporting channels, or awareness programs like ID cards, succession plans, all of that. So an hybrid framework is going to work best depending on what you want. So how do you do the risk assessment so that you know framework is working for you. Risk is normally defined as impact and its likelihood. That is where you can be able to talk about the level of risk because you want to see what is going to affect us. Maybe it is a natural disaster. What impact does it have? Huge. And what is the likelihood of a natural disaster? Then you get and handle it. So that is how you are able to know what is the impact and likelihood that is going to give you the risk. Then what are the threats and what are the assets which are being affected by those threats. So when you want to understand the assets, then you are looking at them in terms of the products and services or critical functions that the processes are going to support. Then you can identify the products and services offered by the organization. Then you understand the processes required in the critical functions and them. Then you determine the resources and assets that are required to perform the processes. And lastly, you identify what are the critical functions needed to deliver the products and services. That is why in many organizations, when we are talking about now the, the world of computing, again, being decentralized and at the same time being centralized, is because we are looking at a situation whereby we are accessing a lot of services from a web server somewhere. Let's say it is SPU, spu.se.k. It has all these web-based services from planning activities, from the data that has been stored there, financial information, academic information, and when it is stored there, we feel that it is very critical for the student to access it from wherever they are. So that is the product which you are looking for, or that is the service which you are looking for as a student or as an educator for me to be able to teach. How do we ensure that it is accessed at all times? That is where we are talking about prioritizing what are the critical functions and ensuring that they will be available. That is why now organizations are moving towards cloud implementations so that even if our remote server or our server within the organization goes down, then our remote server, which is somewhere on the cloud, able to take over those functions and it is able to execute them seamlessly, such that whenever there is a failure within our site, we can still be able to access it remotely. So that is how you understand your asset. What is your critical asset? Like right now, in every higher educational institution, it is very critical for them to be able to operate digitally. So the digital assets are becoming more critical functions and access from wherever. So cloud becomes very critical for any organization, even for marketing institutions, for other institutions which were traditionally not so much into digital systems. Nowadays, they are moving towards digital systems because of the capabilities they are offering. That is why securing them is very important. So, when we understand these assets, then we are going to build the data and the facilities. How do we build the data? Like, let's for another example, like a marketing institution. How does it build its data? By collecting well, maybe user reviews, getting feedback from customers. And when they build that data, then they can build products based on the data that has been collected, and they need to protect this data they have collected. And that is where IT systems where become of importance in terms of securing them so that they become confidential and providing the private sensitive information. So how do we ensure that we understand our threats? We ensure that we understand our threats by looking at challenges like spoofing of identification, tampering the integrity of that information. Things like non-repudiation, somebody doing something and denying that they have done it, information disclosure, confidentiality, denial of service, availability, and elevation of privilege. So some of these threats we are looking at, they are coming out of the essence of maybe cloud computing, remote access, web-based systems. Those are things we need. How do we work on them? So we have contingency risks, like you have a contingency plan, like if this server goes down, we have another server somewhere. How do you switch from our local server to the remote server? That is what we mean by contingency risk. Significant risk. What is the level or what is the level of likelihood in terms of having this risk affecting us? Then we have minor risks like downtime, power going out, and maybe internet disconnection. Then we have high incidence risk impact, whereby they are going to impact the business activity, and then the likelihood, what is the probability of occurrence. So how are you going to give the security control set? One, you're going to give priority to common controls that can support multiple systems efficiently and effectively. Then you use the result of the risk assessment to identify controls that cover high risks. Then you're going to gather feedback from stake. So I hope that makes sense. How we are going to carry out those activities one step at. So that is what we needed to cover there in terms of looking at the security framework. Now, I would like us to look at something else very quickly. Which is the first quiz that we gave. So I hope that is visible. I wanted us to look at it so that when I am giving the second quiz, at least you have an idea of how you will be answering some of these questions. So the first question was asking about how information controls can be planned and implemented from either a top-down or bottom-up perspective. And here, I hope that is a bit clear. So here, you will look at what is top-down security and what is bottom-up security. So from our discussion, we said that security is the one which is in line with the national goals, mission, and strategies, meaning that it has to be conceptualized from management of the organization, and once it has been conceptualized from there, then it is brought down to the lower level. It is implemented from the top of the organization and then brought down the lower level employees. And then when we are talking about the bottom-up security, is whereby we said that is a reactionary kind of security implementation, whereby the employees who are at the lower level of the organization are going to identify risks, and then they come up with a security framework from that level of the organization, then cascading upwards. So that is how the two can be defined or can be differentiated. Then say there are scenarios whereby you can use top down, there are scenarios where you can use bottom up. So where where is bottom up more advantageous? That was the second question. And that is in an area whereby employees are buying in into the aspect of securing the system. So that is where we talk about employee buy-in. Sorry. Talk of There is also, in a scenario of risk identification, can also be using uh, bottom up very well because it is the lower level employees who are a bit more technical and they interact with the systems on a day-to-day basis, and so they can be able to easily identify what risks are there, and so bottom up uh, security framework can work. And then where we need a broader knowledge, we have said the lower level employees have more knowledge in regard to technical aspects of systems, and so they can be able to come up with very good security frameworks. And also in areas where we need to improve collaborations. Like we had said initially, is that you can have a very good security mechanism or you can have a very good security policy, but if is not supported by the lower level employees or there is no collaboration between top level management and the lower level employees, then it is going to be a challenge. So you need a proper collaboration between the top level management and the lower level employees so that the security framework may then go to the third one where we were asking where top-down security is appropriate. And in scenario where we are talking about supporting the mission of the organization, then that is an area where we can talk of security in mission relevant management using top-down security. Also, where there are processes that have matured or in an organization where activities descriptions are clear, then you can use the down uh, security mechanism. So we can talk of a process maturity, also where we need governance and oversight, also where we need planning, budget control, also in places where audit, compliance, support is. So that is where we can use top-down security frameworks. Then, second question was asking, how does an information security policy framework assist in top-down implementation of an information security framework? So when we look at that question, first of all, we need to understand how question is framed and what exactly it is asking for. And so when we talk about an information security framework assisting in implementation, it means that there needs to be the top level management. That is number one. How will it ensure that top level management is supporting the whole process? How does it ensure that there are requirements that have to be met? So those are the things we are looking at. And so we talk about it in terms of mandatory management of organizations. So that is one. We also talk about mandatory refinement of security requirements, that, that being another one. Then we also talk about information security guidelines being as standards, not mandatory. We had said guidelines are just going to help you and how to implement a certain security feature, but they may be not mandatory. And then there's going to be mandatory security control for a selected area of application. Then lastly, there is a step-by-step process for implementation of selected security control. So that is how top-level implementation is going to support information security. Then, given another question here, which is an application question, you are told, review your own organization's information security policies for currency and applicability. So the first question was, can you identify when they were last updated? So here you were required to go and look at how your security policies have been implemented. The first question is, do you have them in place to start with? Do you have those security uh, policies in place? So that is the process you could have used. They in place, to start with. Then when they created, when they created. So once you have answered those three questions, you are good to go. And here you could just any organization, look at it, review its security policies, and then you will be answering those three questions. Then, can you identify upon which information security regulations, laws, and standards current set of policies are based? Like we have said, you could be talking about standards like NIST, you could be talking about standards like ISO. So you want to see what are they based on. So we are talking about either NIST, ISO, all of those are different examples of bodies which have come up with standards you can use. And then, is this inclusive of the required regulations for your industry and sensitive data within your information system? So, which standard are they based on? And is it working, or do you need an hybrid? Is it, or do you need hybrid? Just what we have covered now. And then, if you need it possible to it way? Is it going to take a lot of are there bureaucracies which are going to prevent you from implementing it right away, or is it something that you can work on very quickly? So that is how you answer that question. At least I know you already answered the quiz one, but when we will be coming to the quiz, the second quiz, then you can see how you can be able to answer. And then be prepared to discuss how information security policies take user behavior in the organization and why. So here, when you are talking about user behavior, how are they going to address that. So they are going to address that in dealing with the business mission. So here we are dealing with business mission, organizational structure, organization of controls, industry, so that is how user behavior is going to be influenced in terms of what is your business mission? Then what is the organizational structure? Who reports to who? Who does what? What are the controls which have been put in place? And then what are the threats you are dealing with within your industry? And how is the culture within that industry? So that is how you would answer those questions. Thank you. Any question up there?